Identical twins look exactly alike, which creates obvious potential for confusion. Most mix-ups are harmless mistakes that get laughed about later, but these weren't those situations. 1. In 2009, Brazilian man Sandro da Silva was arrested and imprisoned for crimes committed by his identical twin brother, Rodrigo. Sandro had been living quietly with his family when police arrested him, based on witness identification and fingerprint evidence that actually belonged to Rodrigo. Despite Sandro's protests that police had the wrong man, he was convicted of armed robbery and sentenced to 15 years in prison. Sandro spent over a year in prison for crimes he didn't commit while his twin Rodrigo remained free. The truth only emerged when Rodrigo was arrested for a different crime, and police realized they had two identical men with the same fingerprints in their system. DNA testing finally proved that Sandro was innocent and Rodrigo was the actual criminal. Sandro was released after spending 548 days in prison for his brother's crimes. He sued the state for wrongful imprisonment and received compensation, but the year in prison destroyed his job, strained his marriage, and traumatized him. Rodrigo received a longer sentence for the original crimes, plus additional charges for allowing his brother to be imprisoned. The case highlighted how identical twins can fool even fingerprint identification when prints aren't properly analyzed, and demonstrated the catastrophic consequences of mistaken identity in the criminal justice system. 2. In 2015, a woman in Michigan named Sarah Stevens divorced her husband Mark after catching him cheating, only to discover 6 months later that she'd actually divorced the wrong man. Mark had an identical twin brother named Matthew, who had been impersonating Mark to sleep with Sarah's friends. Sarah had walked in on Mark with another woman in a hotel room, immediately filed for divorce, and refused to speak to Mark despite his desperate claims of innocence. The divorce was finalized with Mark losing custody of their children and most of his assets. 6 months later, Sarah discovered the truth when she encountered both brothers together at a family event and realized Matthew had been systematically impersonating Mark for years, including the affair that triggered the divorce. Sarah tried to reverse the divorce, but the legal process was complicated because she'd signed all divorce papers without investigation. Mark was devastated and refused reconciliation, having lost his family based on his brother's actions. The couple's children were caught in the aftermath of a divorce caused by mistaken identity. Matthew faced no legal consequences because adultery through impersonation wasn't clearly criminal in Michigan at the time. Sarah lost her husband and family due to being unable to tell the twins apart at the critical moment. And Mark lost everything because his wife didn't believe his claims of innocence. 3. In 1999, identical twins Jamal and Jalil Wilson both applied for the same job at a law firm in Atlanta. Jamal was hired after an impressive interview, but on his first day, Jalil showed up instead as a prank to see if anyone would notice. The firm's HR department and Jamal's supervisor didn't realize it was the wrong twin. Jalil spent the entire first day working as Jamal, accessing confidential client files and sitting in on privileged attorney-client meetings. When Jamal arrived the next day, the firm realized what had happened and fired him immediately for the security breach, refusing to believe that his twin had impersonated him without his knowledge. Jamal's legal career was destroyed before it started. He was blacklisted from major law firms in Atlanta, and the incident appeared in background checks for years. Jalil thought the prank was harmless, but didn't realize that accessing confidential legal files and attending privileged meetings created serious ethical violations that the firm had to report to the state bar. Jamal sued both the law firm and his brother. The firm settled, but Jamal's reputation in legal circles was permanently damaged. Jalil faced no criminal charges but destroyed his brother's legal career with what he thought was a funny first-day prank. 4. In 2013, a hospital in Ohio performed knee surgery on the wrong identical twin. Mary Thompson was scheduled for knee replacement surgery, but her twin sister Martha checked in for a routine appointment the same day. Due to identical names in the computer system, both M. Thompson with the same birthday, hospital staff prepped Martha for Mary's surgery. Martha had been sedated before she could explain the error, and the surgery proceeded on her healthy knee. The mistake wasn't discovered until Mary arrived for her surgery and staff realized they'd already operated on her that morning. Martha woke up from anesthesia with a surgically replaced knee she didn't need, while Mary's damaged knee remained untreated. Martha suffered complications from the unnecessary surgery and developed a serious post-operative infection that required additional surgeries. The hospital's insurance paid millions in settlements to both twins. Martha's healthy knee was permanently altered, and she required years of physical therapy for a surgery she never needed. Mary had to wait months for her actual surgery while the hospital investigated. The case became a landmark medical malpractice example of how hospital systems must verify patient identity, even with identical twins. 5. In 2008, a teacher in Texas expelled student Kevin Martinez for fighting, but actually expelled his identical twin brother Carlos, who hadn't been in the fight. The fight had occurred in a crowded hallway, and the principal relied on witness descriptions of the Martinez twin without properly identifying which one. Carlos was expelled and his academic record permanently marked with a disciplinary action. Kevin, who actually fought, faced no consequences and continued attending school. The error wasn't discovered until the end of the school year when Carlos's grades appeared in Kevin's record and vice versa, revealing that they'd been teaching and disciplining the wrong twin for months. By then, Carlos had lost a full year of education, and his college applications were rejected due to the expulsion on his record. The family sued the school district, which eventually cleared Carlos's record and allowed him to return, but he'd lost a year of his education and his college plans were derailed. Kevin finally faced discipline, but by then had graduated. The case led to policy changes requiring school staff to use additional identification methods beyond appearance when disciplining identical twins. 6. In 2016, police in Florida arrested identical twin Marcus Johnson for violating parole. But Marcus had never been on parole. His brother Michael had been. The mix-up occurred when Michael used Marcus's ID during his original arrest years earlier, meaning Michael's criminal record was filed under Marcus's name. Marcus was arrested at his workplace based on a parole violation warrant that was actually for Michael. He spent 3 days in jail before his lawyer proved through employment records and alibi evidence that Marcus couldn't have been the person who committed the original crime or violated parole. Investigation revealed that Michael had been using Marcus's identity for years, committing crimes under his brother's name while Marcus remained law-abiding. Marcus's credit was ruined. He lost his job due to the arrest, and his background checks showed crimes he never committed. Police eventually arrested Michael for identity fraud and the various crimes, but clearing Marcus's record took years of legal work and expense. Marcus's life was devastated by his brother's deliberate identity theft, combined with law enforcement's inability to distinguish between them. The brothers had been estranged for years, and this case permanently severed their relationship. 7. In 2011, a university in California awarded a diploma to the wrong identical twin at graduation. Jessica Chen had completed all her coursework and was graduating with honors, but her twin sister Jennifer walked in the graduation ceremony as a prank, while Jessica was delayed by traffic. University staff handed Jennifer the diploma during the ceremony, and she accepted it without revealing the switch. When Jessica arrived later, university records showed she'd already graduated and received her diploma. The registrar's office initially refused to issue a duplicate, claiming she'd already received it. The error wasn't resolved for weeks, during which Jessica couldn't start her job because her employer needed verification of graduation. When the truth emerged, the university was embarrassed. Jennifer faced disciplinary action for fraud, and Jessica's job start date was delayed by 6 weeks, costing her thousands in delayed salary. The prank that seemed harmless to Jennifer had serious professional consequences for Jessica's career start. The sisters' relationship was permanently damaged, and Jessica never fully forgave Jennifer for jeopardizing her professional future for a prank. 8. In 2014, a judge in New York issued a restraining order against the wrong identical twin in a domestic violence case. Sarah Mitchell had filed for a restraining order against her abusive boyfriend's twin brother by mistake after seeing him at a shopping mall and assuming he was her ex. The judge issued the order based on Sarah's testimony, but the restrained twin had never even met Sarah and lived in a different state. The wrongly restrained twin, Peter, lost his job because the restraining order appeared in his background check, and he couldn't get his landlord to renew his lease because of the domestic violence connection. Peter had to hire a lawyer and spend thousands proving he'd never met Sarah and wasn't the abusive boyfriend, his twin Paul. By the time the error was corrected months later, Peter's life was upended. He'd lost his job, his apartment, and faced months of legal expenses to clear his name. Sarah was horrified when she realized her mistake, but the damage was done. Paul, the actual abuser, faced no consequences during the period when the wrong brother was restrained. The case demonstrated how mistaken identity and legal proceedings can destroy innocent lives. 9. In 2010, a company in Illinois promoted the wrong identical twin to a management position. Jason Lee had been working at the company for 5 years and was promised a promotion to department head. His twin brother James worked in a different department at the same company. When the promotion was announced, HR accidentally sent the promotion letter and new contract to James instead of Jason. James, thinking there had been an internal transfer he wasn't aware of, signed the paperwork and started working in the new role. By the time the company realized they'd promoted the wrong twin, James had been in the position for 3 weeks and had made several important decisions. The company couldn't easily reverse the promotion without legal complications, since James had a signed contract. Jason was devastated. He'd worked toward the promotion for years while James essentially got it by accident. The company offered Jason a different promotion, but the damage to his career trajectory was done. The brothers' relationship became strained as Jason felt James should have realized the error and declined the position. James kept the job, but the family fallout and workplace awkwardness lasted for years. 10. In 2007, a bank in Massachusetts froze the wrong twins account due to suspected fraud. Robert and Richard Patterson were identical twins who both banked at the same institution. When Richard's account showed suspicious activity from actual fraud, the bank froze Robert's account by mistake based on identical appearance and ID photos. Robert discovered his account was frozen when his rent check bounced, his credit card was declined buying groceries, and he couldn't access his life savings. The bank insisted they'd frozen the correct account despite Robert's protests. Robert's landlord began eviction proceedings, his credit score dropped from the bounced check, and he couldn't pay bills for 3 weeks while the bank investigated. When the error was finally discovered, Robert had late fees on every bill, his credit was damaged, and he was facing eviction. The bank eventually corrected the error, but the credit damage and late fees cost Robert thousands. He sued the bank for negligence and won a settlement, but the weeks without access to his money during the mix-up nearly made him homeless. Richard's actual fraudulent account was frozen late, allowing the criminals to steal more money before the bank finally targeted the right account. 11. In 2017, a prison in Texas released the wrong identical twin, early due to mistaken identity. Marcus and Malcolm Green were both serving sentences in different facilities. When Marcus became eligible for early release, the parole board accidentally processed Malcolm's release instead, due to confusion over their identical booking photos and similar case files. Malcolm was released 6 months early from a longer sentence, while Marcus remained in prison past his eligible release date. The error wasn't discovered for 2 months, during which Malcolm was free while Marcus remained unjustly imprisoned past his earned release. When corrections officials realized the mistake, they rearrested Malcolm and released Marcus. But the experience was traumatic for both brothers. Marcus sued the state for the additional 2 months he spent wrongly incarcerated. Malcolm was sent back to prison to complete his sentence, and the bungled release affected his future parole eligibility. The case became a scandal demonstrating how poorly prison systems verify inmate identity, even with known identical twins in the system. 12. In 2012, a doctor in New Jersey prescribed medication to the wrong identical twin with nearly fatal consequences. Anna and Amanda Rodriguez were both patients of the same physician. Amanda had severe allergies to certain medications, which was noted in her chart. When Anna came in for a routine appointment, the doctor mistook her for Amanda and refused to prescribe medication that Anna needed, thinking Anna was Amanda with the dangerous allergies. Meanwhile, when Amanda came in the next week, the doctor thought she was Anna and prescribed exactly the medications Amanda was deathly allergic to. Amanda filled the prescription and took the medication, going into anaphylactic shock that required emergency hospitalization. She nearly died from an allergic reaction to medication her doctor should never have prescribed to her. The medical malpractice lawsuit revealed that the doctor had consistently confused the twins for years, but previous mix-ups had been minor. This time, the confusion nearly killed Amanda. The doctor's insurance settled for a significant sum, but Amanda suffered lasting health effects from the severe allergic reaction. The doctor faced medical board discipline for failing to properly verify patient identity before prescribing potentially lethal medications. 13. In 2015, a college in Oregon gave the wrong identical twin an academic suspension for plagiarism. Rachel Williams had plagiarized a major paper, but the academic review board suspended her twin sister, Rebecca, instead, due to confusion during the hearing. Rebecca missed an entire semester of school, serving a suspension for cheating she didn't commit. When she tried to explain the error, administrators didn't believe her, assuming she was Rachel trying to avoid consequences. The truth only emerged when Rachel, racked with guilt, confessed to the correct administrators. By then, Rebecca had lost a semester, fallen behind in her degree program, and lost her housing because the suspension made her ineligible for on-campus residence. The college reinstated Rebecca and gave her a tuition waiver for the lost semester, but she'd missed internship opportunities and graduate school application deadlines. Rachel faced the correct suspension, but Rebecca's academic career was permanently altered by the lost semester and opportunities. The sisters' relationship survived but was strained by Rachel's initial silence while her twins served her punishment. 14. In 2009, police in England pulled over and arrested the wrong identical twin for drunk driving. James Foster had been driving drunk and crashed his car, then fled the scene. Police went to his registered address and arrested his twin brother John, who'd been home all evening and was completely sober. Despite John's breathalyzer showing 0 alcohol and his alibis proving he couldn't have been driving, police charged him based on the car's registration. John spent a night in jail and had his driver's license suspended before DNA evidence, and thorough investigation proved James was the driver. By the time John was cleared, he'd lost his job as a delivery driver due to the license suspension and drunk driving charge appearing in his record. James was eventually caught and charged, but John's professional reputation was damaged by being arrested for drunk driving, even though he was proven innocent. John sued the police for wrongful arrest and won compensation, but the incident cost him his driving job and appeared in background checks for years afterward despite being cleared. 15. In 2018, a fertility clinic in Spain accidentally implanted the wrong twins' embryo, resulting in a pregnancy that wasn't genetically related to the intended mother. Identical twins Maria and Marta Gomez had both undergone IVF at the same clinic. The clinic accidentally implanted Maria's embryo into Marta due to the twins' identical identifying information in the system. Marta became pregnant and carried the baby to term, assuming it was her genetic child. The error was only discovered after the baby was born, and genetic testing for unrelated reasons revealed the baby was genetically Maria's child, not Marta's. Both families were devastated. Marta had bonded with the baby she carried and gave birth to, but who wasn't genetically hers, while Maria discovered she had a genetic child being raised by her sister. The clinic faced massive liability for the error. The families had to navigate impossible emotional and legal territory. Was the baby Marta's since she carried and birthed it, or Maria's since it was her genetic child? The case settled privately, but both twins' lives were forever altered by the identity mix-up at the fertility clinic. The emotional trauma for both families and the question of the child's identity created permanent family complications. 16. In 2011, a wedding in India resulted in the groom accidentally marrying the bride's identical twin sister in a case of deliberate deception. Ashok was arranged to marry Reena, but Reena's family wanted to preserve her for a wealthier match. They substituted Reena's identical twin Meena at the wedding ceremony, keeping Reena hidden. Ashok didn't realize he'd married the wrong twin until the wedding night, when Reena couldn't answer basic questions about their courtship. Ashok's family discovered the deception and demanded annulment, but by then the marriage was legal and consummated. The resulting scandal tore both families apart. Ashok filed for annulment based on fraud, but Indian law at the time didn't clearly address twin substitution. Meena claimed she loved Ashok and wanted to stay married, while Reena had been married off to the wealthier suitor her family preferred. The case went through years of litigation with Ashok seeking annulment, Meena seeking to preserve the marriage, and Rena's family facing fraud charges. The deliberate twin substitution destroyed 3 lives and 2 families. The case became famous in India as an example of how arranged marriage fraud could exploit identical twins. 17. In 2013, a company in Australia fired the wrong identical twin in a downsizing. Peter and Paul Stevens both worked at the same corporation in different departments. When the company needed to eliminate positions, they intended to fire Paul, whose performance had been poor. Instead, HR sent termination papers to Peter, who'd been a model employee with excellent reviews. Peter was escorted out of the building before anyone realized the error. Paul continued working, assuming he'd survived the layoffs. When the mistake was discovered 2 weeks later, Peter had already accepted another job at a competitor. The original company wanted Peter back and offered him a promotion, but Peter refused, feeling betrayed by being fired without warning after years of strong performance. Paul was finally terminated, but the damage was done. The company lost a valuable employee because they'd confused identical twins in their own HR system. Peter's new job was actually better, but the trauma of being suddenly fired and escorted out impacted his trust in employers. The company faced a lawsuit for the wrongful termination and had to pay significant damages for their failure to properly identify which twin they meant to fire. 18. In 2010, a man in Sweden named Eric Johansson discovered he'd been dating his girlfriend's identical twin for 3 months, without realizing there were 2 of them. Eric was dating Anna, who had an identical twin, Sarah, living in a different city. Sarah visited Anna periodically and would impersonate her sister when Anna was busy, or didn't want to see Eric. The twins maintained the deception as a game, with Eric never realizing he was actually dating 2 different women who looked identical. When Eric proposed marriage to Anna, both twins confessed the deception. Eric was devastated. He didn't know which twin he'd fallen in love with since he'd spent time with both thinking they were one person. The relationship ended immediately with Eric feeling violated and manipulated. Both twins tried to pursue relationships with Eric individually, each claiming he'd really connected with her specifically, but Eric refused both. The emotional manipulation destroyed Eric's trust in relationships for years. The twins' relationship was also damaged as they blamed each other for ruining their chances with Eric. What the twins thought was a harmless prank caused serious psychological harm to someone who'd been deceived about the fundamental identity of his relationship partner. 19. In 2016, a court in Brazil convicted the wrong identical twin of murder in a case that took 5 years to correct. Rodrigo Silva was convicted of killing a store clerk during a robbery based on security camera footage and eyewitness testimony. Rodrigo maintained his innocence throughout the trial, claiming his twin brother Roberto was the actual killer. The jury didn't believe his twin defense, viewing it as a desperate ploy, and convicted Rodrigo, who was sentenced to 25 years in prison. 3 years into his sentence, Roberto was arrested for a different violent crime and confessed to the murder Rodrigo was imprisoned for, trying to reduce his new sentence through cooperation. DNA evidence and Roberto's detailed confession proved Rodrigo was innocent. Rodrigo was released after spending 3 years in prison for a murder his identical twin committed. He sued the state for wrongful conviction and received compensation, but those 3 years in a Brazilian prison were traumatic and dangerous. His family had fallen apart, his fiancée had married someone else, and his career prospects were destroyed. Roberto received the correct murder conviction plus additional time for allowing his brother to be wrongfully imprisoned. The case highlighted how identical twin defenses are often dismissed as lies, even when they're true. 20. In 2014, a hospital in Canada performed a heart transplant evaluation on the wrong identical twin, wasting a rare organ donation opportunity. Daniel Cooper was on the heart transplant waiting list due to terminal heart disease. His twin David had a healthy heart. When a donor heart became available, the hospital called Daniel to come in immediately. David answered Daniel's phone, learned about the transplant, and went to the hospital thinking he was helping expedite his brother's procedure. Hospital staff, seeing David's healthy condition and not realizing he was the twin, ran the evaluation tests and discovered Daniel actually had a healthy heart and didn't need a transplant. They removed Daniel from the transplant list based on tests run on David, and the donor heart went to another recipient. The error wasn't discovered until Daniel visited the hospital later, and doctors saw he was still in heart failure. By then, the donor heart was gone. Daniel had to wait for another donor match, and his condition deteriorated while waiting. David was horrified that his well-meaning attempt to help had cost his brother a life-saving heart transplant. Daniel waited 9 more months before another match was found, and doctors said the delay had reduced his long-term survival chances. The hospital faced intense criticism for confusing identical twins in a life-or-death transplant situation. 21. In 2008, police in Germany arrested the wrong identical twin in a high-profile art theft. Twin brothers Hassan and Abbas Ramazani were both art dealers. Hassan had stolen a valuable painting from a museum, but security footage showing the thief couldn't definitively identify which twin. Police arrested Abbas, whose business was legitimate, based on him being in the city at the time. Abbas spent 6 months in pre-trial detention before his lawyer proved through cell phone location data and financial records that Abbas couldn't have committed the theft. Hassan had been living off the theft proceeds while his innocent brother sat in jail. When Abbas was finally released, his business had collapsed, his reputation was destroyed, and he'd lost 6 months of his life. Hassan was eventually arrested with the stolen painting, but by then Abbas's art dealing business was bankrupt. Abbas sued for wrongful imprisonment and received compensation, but his career in the art world was over. People always associated him with the theft even after being cleared. The brothers were estranged permanently, with Hassan's crime destroying Abbas's livelihood even though Abbas was innocent. 22. In 2015, a university in Canada expelled the wrong twin for selling drugs on campus. Michael Chen had been dealing marijuana from his dorm room, but campus police raided his twin brother Marcus's room instead due to confusion over room numbers and resident names. They found Marcus's prescription Adderall for ADHD and charged him with drug dealing, assuming the prescription medication was being sold. Marcus was expelled before proper investigation revealed that Michael was the actual dealer, and Marcus's Adderall was legitimate prescription medication. By the time Marcus was cleared, he'd lost his scholarship, been forced to leave university housing, and his academic standing was destroyed. Michael was eventually expelled, but Marcus's educational trajectory was permanently altered. He had to reapply to the university, lost a year of school, and his graduate school plans were derailed. The university offered compensation and readmission, but the trauma of being falsely expelled for drug dealing impacted Marcus's academic confidence and career trajectory. The brothers' relationship ended permanently, with Marcus refusing to forgive Michael for dealing drugs from their dorm, knowing the identical twin confusion could result in Marcus facing consequences. 23. In 2012, a man in Texas married his longtime girlfriend without realizing he'd been dating her identical twin for the last 6 months of their relationship. Kevin Davis had been dating Amy for 2 years when Amy's twin sister Ashley returned from overseas. Unbeknownst to Kevin, Ashley began impersonating Amy during periods when Amy was busy with work or simply didn't want to deal with relationship obligations. Kevin proposed after a particularly great weekend that had actually been with Ashley. Kevin married Amy in a beautiful ceremony, but on the honeymoon, his new wife couldn't recall specific memories from their relationship or know details she should have known. Kevin realized something was wrong and confronted Amy, who revealed she was actually Ashley. Amy had been fine with the twin substitution during dating, but was horrified that Ashley had married Kevin in her place. The marriage was annulled on grounds of fraud, but the psychological damage was immense. Kevin had married someone he thought was his girlfriend of 2 years, but was actually her twin sister. He'd been deceived about his partner's identity for months. All 3 people involved required therapy. Kevin's trust in relationships was destroyed, and the twins' relationship ended with Ashley facing potential fraud charges. 24. In 2009, a hospital in Ireland performed surgery on the wrong identical twins baby during a cesarean section mix-up. Pregnant identical twins Karen and Sharon Murphy were both scheduled for C-sections on the same day at the same hospital. Due to confusion over their identical medical charts and last names, medical staff began operating on Karen's abdomen but were holding Sharon's baby's information. They performed the C-section but delivered using protocols appropriate for Sharon's specific complications rather than Karen's. The error caused complications for Karen's baby because the wrong medical protocols were followed. Both babies survived, but Karen's baby required additional medical intervention due to the protocol mix-up. The hospital faced massive liability for confusing identical twin patients during critical surgery. Both women were traumatized by the realization that medical staff had confused them during their babies' births. The babies recovered, but the incident highlighted how dangerous it is when medical systems can't reliably distinguish between identical twin patients in critical care moments. 25. In 2016, a man in South Korea was charged with adultery and lost his family after being identified as the person caught on hotel security footage, but the footage actually showed his identical twin brother. Min Ho Park's twin brother, Min Jun, had been having an affair with a married woman. When the woman's husband hired a private investigator, security footage appeared to show Min Ho entering and leaving hotels with the woman. Min Ho's wife filed for divorce, taking their children and most of his assets. Min Ho desperately claimed it was his twin brother in the footage, but his wife didn't believe him, seeing it as a cliched excuse. The divorce was finalized before Min Ho could prove his innocence. Only when Min Jun was caught by police in an unrelated incident and admitted to the affair did the truth emerge. By then, Min Ho's marriage was destroyed. He'd lost custody of his children, and his reputation was ruined. His ex-wife tried to reconcile, but Min Ho refused. She hadn't believed him when he told the truth. The destroyed family and Min Ho's permanent estrangement from his children resulted from his twin brother's affair combined with inability of surveillance footage to distinguish between identical twins. 26. In 2011, a company in Japan promoted the wrong identical twin to a critical position overseeing $50 million in projects. Takeshi Tanaka was a senior engineer slated for promotion to project director. His twin brother Hiroshi worked in a different division. Due to HR confusion over their identical employee photos and similar names, Hiroshi received the promotion notification and new security clearances. Hiroshi, assuming there'd been an internal transfer, accepted the position and began directing multiple high-stakes engineering projects he wasn't qualified to oversee. By the time the company discovered the error 3 weeks later, Hiroshi had made several critical decisions on projects he didn't understand. One of his decisions caused a $15 million construction delay. The company couldn't easily reverse the promotion because Hiroshi had been operating in good faith with proper documentation. Takeshi's career was derailed. The promotion he'd worked toward went to his less qualified brother by accident. The company offered Takeshi a different position, but the damage was done. Hiroshi kept the job after accelerated training, but the $15 million construction delay cost the company dearly. The brothers' relationship suffered permanent damage over the accidental promotion mix-up. 27. In 2013, police in Mexico arrested the wrong identical twin in a kidnapping case, leading to a wrongful conviction that took 7 years to overturn. Juan and Carlos Hernandez were twins from a poor neighborhood. Carlos was part of a cartel kidnapping ring, but police arrested Juan based on witness identification and grainy surveillance footage. Juan's alibi wasn't believed. He'd been at home with family who prosecutors claimed would lie for him. Juan was convicted of kidnapping and sentenced to 20 years in prison. He served 7 years before an investigative journalist took interest in his case and discovered through extensive investigation that Carlos was the actual kidnapper. DNA evidence and Carlos's eventually confession exonerated Juan, but he'd spent 7 years in a Mexican prison for crimes his twin committed. Juan was released, but his young adult years were stolen. His education was non-existent, and he suffered severe PTSD from years in prison. The Mexican government eventually compensated Juan, but no money could return the 7 years lost. Carlos received the appropriate kidnapping conviction, but Juan's life was destroyed by 7 years of wrongful imprisonment for simply looking identical to his criminal twin brother. 28. In 2010, a teacher in New York failed the wrong identical twin on a critical exam that determined college admission. Emily Wong had studied extensively for her AP exam, but her twin sister Emma took a makeup exam on the same day. The proctor confused their exams during collection and submitted Emily's blank test in Emma's name and Emma's completed test in Emily's name. Emily received a failing grade on an exam she'd actually completed, while Emma received a perfect score on an exam she'd barely started. The error cost Emily acceptance to her dream college, which had been conditional on passing the AP exam. By the time the error was discovered months later, Emily had already enrolled in her backup school and lost her scholarship to her first choice. Emma felt guilty but kept the unearned perfect score. The College Board eventually corrected Emily's score, but she'd already missed the enrollment deadline for her preferred school. Emily lost a scholarship worth over $100,000 and had to attend a less prestigious university because of the exam mix-up. The sisters' relationship was damaged because Emily felt Emma should have reported the suspicious perfect score on an exam she knew she'd failed. 29. In 2014, a hospital in China gave the wrong identical twins baby to the wrong twin in a maternity ward mix-up. Twin sisters Li Wei and Li Mei both gave birth within hours of each other at the same hospital. Due to identical names and confusion in the nursery, each mother went home with her sister's baby. The error wasn't discovered for 3 days when one baby showed allergic reactions to formula that didn't match the mother's family history. DNA testing revealed the babies had been swapped. Both families were traumatized by learning they'd been caring for their niece-nephew rather than their own child for the baby's first days. The emotional impact of bonding with the wrong baby, then having to exchange, was devastating. The hospital faced massive liability for confusing identical twin mothers and swapping their newborns. While the babies were safely returned to their biological mothers, the psychological impact of the swap affected both families permanently. The twins remained close, but the hospital's mix-up created trauma around what should have been the joy of their children's births. 30. In 2008, a bank in Singapore approved a massive loan for the wrong identical twin based on the other twin's credit history. Robert and Richard Lim both banked at the same institution. When Richard applied for a $500,000 business loan, the bank confused him with Robert, who had excellent credit and high income. The loan was approved based on Robert's financial history rather than Richard's actual poor credit and unemployment. Richard used the loan to start a business that quickly failed. When Richard defaulted, the bank went after Robert's assets based on the loan being in his system records. Robert proved he'd never applied for or received the loan, but by then the bank's error had tangled both brothers' finances. Richard declared bankruptcy, but the bank's confusion meant Robert's credit was also affected. Legal untangling took 2 years, during which Robert couldn't get his own mortgages or loans due to the Richard's defaulted loan on his credit report. The bank eventually paid damages to both brothers, but Robert's financial plans were delayed years. Richard's business failure was compounded by legal liability for obtaining a loan under false pretenses, even though the bank's error caused the mix-up. 31. In 2015, a police department in Chicago hired the wrong identical twin as a police officer, not realizing they'd interviewed and vetted his twin brother. James Williams had applied to the police academy, passed all interviews and background checks. His twin brother Jason showed up for the first day of academy training as a prank, planning to reveal himself before anything serious happened. But Jason's prank worked too well. No one realized it wasn't James for the entire first week of training. Jason, enjoying the deception, continued the prank while James was out of town. By week 2, Jason had second thoughts, but had gone too far to admit the deception without serious consequences. He continued through a month of police training before finally being caught when both twins appeared at a police social event. The police department was humiliated and criminally charged Jason for fraud and impersonating a police officer. James's application was rejected permanently. He'd been deemed untrustworthy for his brother's actions, even though James hadn't known about the extended impersonation. Jason faced criminal fraud charges and was barred from law enforcement. James's dream career was destroyed by his brother's prank that went way too far. 32. In 2012, a woman in France unknowingly married her husband's identical twin after the twin deliberately killed and replaced his brother. This sounds like fiction, but actually happened. Pierre Martin killed his identical twin, Paul Martin, and assumed Paul's identity, including moving in with Paul's wife, Sophie. Sophie noticed personality changes in her husband, but attributed them to stress and potential mental health issues. The deception lasted 3 months before police investigating Paul's disappearance discovered his body and arrested Pierre. DNA evidence and confession revealed that Pierre had killed Paul out of jealousy over his successful life and wife, then simply replaced him. Sophie was traumatized beyond measure. She'd been living with and intimate with her husband's murderer for months, thinking he was her husband. The psychological horror of learning she'd been married to a killer who'd replaced her husband destroyed Sophie's mental health. Pierre was convicted of murder and fraud. Sophie required years of intensive therapy. The case became one of France's most disturbing criminal cases, showing how identical twins could be used for sinister identity theft, even to the point of replacing a murdered brother in his own marriage. 33. In 2009, a medical school in the United States expelled the wrong identical twin for cheating on a critical exam. David Lee had used hidden notes during a medical licensing exam, but his twin brother Daniel was expelled instead due to confusion over their identical ID photos. Daniel's career in medicine ended before it started. He was expelled and barred from medical licensing with a permanent mark for cheating. David continued through medical school and received his medical degree. The truth only emerged 3 years later when David, overcome with guilt, confessed to the cheating. By then, Daniel had completely changed career paths, taking on significant debt for a graduate degree in a different field. The medical school cleared Daniel's record and offered to readmit him, but Daniel had moved on and couldn't afford to return to medical school after already investing in a new career. David lost his medical license when the truth emerged and faced fraud charges. Both twins' careers were destroyed. Daniel lost 3 years to wrongful expulsion, and David lost his medical career to eventual exposure. The brothers never reconciled. 34. In 2016, a man in Russia was convicted of assaulting his ex-girlfriend, but the assault was actually committed by his identical twin brother during an impersonation. Viktor and Alexei Volkov were twins who'd grown apart. Alexei, angry at Viktor's ex-girlfriend Elena for the breakup, impersonated Viktor and attacked Elena. Elena identified Viktor as her attacker, never suspecting his twin. Viktor was convicted and sentenced to 5 years in prison, despite his claims of innocence and twin confusion. He served 2 years before Alexei, racked with guilt, confessed. DNA evidence and Alexei's confession freed Viktor, but he'd spent 2 years in a Russian prison for an assault his twin committed while deliberately framing him. Viktor's life was destroyed. His job, apartment, and relationships were gone. His ex-girlfriend Elena was re-traumatized, learning she'd sent the wrong man to prison. Alexei received the assault conviction plus additional time for fraud and perjury. Viktor sued for compensation, but 2 years in prison had broken him psychologically. The brothers' identical appearance allowed Alexei to frame Viktor perfectly. Elena had no way to know she was identifying the wrong twin. 35. In 2011, a fertility clinic in Italy accidentally used the wrong identical twin sperm for an IVF procedure, resulting in a child that wasn't genetically related to the intended father. Marco and Matteo Rossi had both banked sperm at the same clinic. When Marco and his wife underwent IVF, the clinic used Matteo's sperm by mistake, due to sample labeling confusion with identical donor information. The couple's son was born and raised for 3 years before genetic testing, for a medical issue revealed the child wasn't genetically Marco's son, but rather Matteo's. Both brothers and their families were devastated. Marco had bonded with a child who was actually his nephew, while Matteo had a genetic son he'd never intended to father. The legal, emotional, and family ramifications were impossible to untangle. Marco's wife felt violated that she'd been impregnated with the wrong brother's sperm. Matteo's wife was upset her husband had a child with his brother's wife. The clinic faced massive liability. The families eventually agreed that Marco would remain the legal and social father, while Matteo would have uncle status. But the relationships were permanently complicated by knowing the true genetic parentage. 36. In 2013, police in Thailand arrested the wrong identical twin for heroin trafficking, leading to a wrongful imprisonment that nearly resulted in execution. Somchai and Somkid Pramoj were twin brothers. Somkid was a major heroin trafficker, but police arrested Somchai based on informant identification and surveillance footage. Thailand has the death penalty for drug trafficking, and Somchai was sentenced to death despite his desperate claims that his twin was the actual criminal. Somchai spent 4 years on death row before Somkid was arrested in a different country, and DNA evidence proved Somchai's innocence. Somchai was released, but his 4 years on death row left him severely traumatized with PTSD. He'd been months away from execution when the truth emerged. Somkid received the death sentence for trafficking, but Somchai's life was destroyed by 4 years thinking he'd be executed for crimes his twin committed. The case highlighted the horrific consequences when identical twin confusion combines with justice systems that use death penalty. Somchai was nearly executed for simply looking identical to his brother. 37. In 2010, a university in Australia awarded a Rhodes Scholarship to the wrong identical twin in a case of deliberate substitution. Christopher Martin had worked for years toward winning the prestigious scholarship, competing through multiple rounds. His twin brother Cameron, who hadn't applied, impersonated Christopher at the final interview as a prank to see if anyone would notice. The interview panel didn't realize the switch. Cameron, caught up in the prank, performed well and felt guilty when Christopher won the scholarship. When Cameron confessed, both brothers were devastated. The scholarship committee was furious at the deception and revoked the award entirely rather than giving it to Christopher, who'd earned it. Christopher lost the scholarship he'd worked years to achieve because of his brother's prank. Cameron faced fraud charges and was banned from the university. Christopher's academic reputation was damaged by association with the fraud, even though he'd been the victim of his brother's deception. The Rhodes Scholarship went to another candidate entirely. Christopher's career trajectory was altered by losing the opportunity, and he never forgave Cameron for destroying his chances at one of the world's most prestigious scholarships. 38. In 2014, a hospital in South Africa performed chemotherapy on the wrong identical twin, giving toxic cancer treatment to a twin who didn't have cancer. Anna and Maria Botha were identical twins, but only Maria had been diagnosed with breast cancer. Due to confusion in hospital records with identical names and birth dates, staff administered Maria's chemotherapy regimen to Anna during an appointment. Anna received a full dose of toxic chemotherapy she didn't need before anyone realized the error. Anna suffered all the horrific side effects of chemotherapy: nausea, hair loss, immune system damage, despite having no cancer. Meanwhile, Maria missed her scheduled chemotherapy, delaying her actual cancer treatment. Anna was hospitalized from the chemotherapy side effects and suffered permanent damage to her kidneys and heart from the unnecessary toxic treatment. Maria's cancer treatment was set back, potentially reducing her survival odds. The hospital faced catastrophic malpractice liability for giving cancer treatment to the wrong twin. Anna's health was permanently impacted by toxic chemotherapy she should never have received. The case became one of South Africa's most serious medical mix-up scandals. 39. In 2008, a couple in Japan got divorced after the husband discovered he'd been having an affair with his wife's identical twin sister and couldn't figure out which twin he'd actually married. Kenji had married Yuki after a 2-year courtship. Unbeknownst to him, Yuki's twin Yumi had been impersonating Yuki occasionally during the dating period and continued occasionally after marriage. When Kenji discovered there were 2 Yukis in his life, he was devastated. He didn't know which twin he'd actually married or which one he'd fallen in love with. Both twins claimed to be the real wife, each insisting she'd been the primary woman in his life. Kenji's psychological breakdown from not knowing his own wife's identity led to divorce from both twins. Investigation revealed that Yuki and Yumi had been playing games with Kenji from the beginning, switching places regularly. The emotional abuse of deceiving Kenji about basic identity destroyed his mental health. He developed trust issues and required therapy for years. The twins' marriage prospects were destroyed when word spread about their deception. The case highlighted how identity confusion with identical twins can be weaponized for psychological manipulation. 40. In 2015, a court in Italy mistakenly granted custody of children to the wrong identical twin in a complex divorce case. Giorgio and Giovanni Bianchi were twin brothers married to twin sisters in a double wedding. When both couples divorced simultaneously, the court became confused and granted Giorgio's children to Giovanni and vice versa. Neither brother noticed immediately because they were living separately, and the children were with their mothers primarily. The error wasn't discovered for 6 months when paperwork discrepancies emerged. By then, legal custody had been established with the wrong fathers. The court's error created a nightmare of redoing custody arrangements, and both families had begun adapting to the wrong custody assignment. The children were confused about which father legally had custody of them versus which father was actually their genetic father. The court's inability to distinguish identical twins during legal proceedings created family chaos that took years to legally unwind. Both families were traumatized by the prolonged uncertainty over custody caused by simple mistaken identity. 41. In 2012, a man in Brazil was fired from his job for sexual harassment committed by his identical twin brother who worked in the same office building for a different company. Paulo Santos worked in accounting, while his twin Pedro worked in sales 2 floors up. Pedro had been sexually harassing women throughout the building, but victims identified Paulo from photos shown by HR investigators. Paulo was fired immediately without being given a chance to defend himself. He lost his job, his reputation, and his career prospects, while Pedro continued harassing women undetected. The truth only emerged when Pedro was caught on security footage during an incident, and investigators realized there were 2 identical men in the building. By then, Paulo had been unemployed for months, his name was associated with sexual harassment, and his career trajectory was destroyed. Pedro was fired and faced criminal charges, but Paulo's professional reputation never fully recovered. Paulo sued his former employer for wrongful termination and won substantial damages, but the months of unemployment and the sexual harassment association haunted his career forever. The identical twin confusion allowed Pedro to continue his harassment while Paulo suffered the consequences. 42. In 2009, a woman in the Philippines married her fiancé only to discover during the honeymoon that her fiancé's identical twin had been substituting for him during parts of their courtship and wedding ceremony. Rosa had been dating Miguel for 2 years when Miguel's twin Manuel began occasionally impersonating him when Miguel was busy with work. Manuel attended some dates, family events, and even parts of the wedding ceremony as Miguel. Rosa had no idea there were 2 people until the honeymoon when Miguel had no memory of events from their courtship. When confronted, Manuel confessed that he and Miguel had been sharing Rosa's relationship, with Manuel attending perhaps 30% of dates and events. Rosa was devastated. She didn't know which twin she'd actually fallen in love with or which one she'd married. The marriage was annulled on grounds of fraud. Both brothers had deceived Rosa, with Miguel allowing his twin to impersonate him and Manuel participating in the deception. Yes. Rosa suffered psychological trauma from the betrayal and trust issues that affected her future relationships. Both twins faced social ostracism in their community for the deception. Rosa's case became famous in the Philippines as a warning about twin substitution in romantic relationships. 43. In 2016, a prison in Canada released a dangerous convicted murderer early while keeping his innocent twin brother imprisoned past his sentence for a minor drug offense. The twins Marcus and Michael Thompson were serving sentences in the same facility. Marcus was serving life for murder while Michael was serving 2 years for drug possession. When Michael became eligible for release, prison officials confused the twins and released Marcus instead. Marcus didn't correct the error and fled the country. Michael remained in prison serving his twin's life sentence without anyone realizing the error for 3 months. When the mistake was discovered, massive manhunt was launched for Marcus, who'd left Canada. Michael was finally released after 3 months of wrongful imprisonment past his sentence, but the psychological trauma of those months was severe. Marcus was eventually caught abroad and returned to Canadian custody. Michael sued the prison system for the wrongful extended imprisonment. The case became a massive scandal demonstrating how even high-security prisons couldn't reliably distinguish between identical twin inmates, resulting in a murderer walking free while his brother, who'd nearly completed his sentence, remained wrongly imprisoned. 44. In 2011, a man in Singapore was denied a visa to work abroad because his identical twin brother had overstayed a visa in that country years earlier and been deported. Raj Kumar had a job offer in Australia, but Australian immigration denied his visa application because he had previously violated immigration law. The violation was actually committed by Raj's twin Ravi, who'd been deported from Australia for overstaying a work visa. Immigration officials couldn't distinguish between the twins in their database and held Raj responsible for Ravi's violations. Despite Raj proving through documents that he'd never been to Australia, immigration officials insisted their records showed he'd been deported. Raj lost the job opportunity, and his career advancement was blocked by his twins' immigration violations. It took 2 years of legal battles and DNA testing to finally convince Australian immigration that Raj and Ravi were two different people. By then, Raj's job opportunity was long gone, and the years of fighting immigration bureaucracy had cost him significant money and career opportunities. Ravi's past visa violation permanently complicated Raj's international travel because border systems couldn't reliably distinguish between them. 45. And finally, in 2018, a couple in Germany successfully sued a hospital after discovering their baby was accidentally switched with the baby of the mother's identical twin sister who gave birth in the same hospital on the same day. Twin sisters Anna and Emma Schmidt both gave birth within hours at the same hospital. Due to identical names and appearance, nurses mixed up the babies in the nursery. Each mother went home with her sister's baby. The error wasn't discovered for 2 weeks when Anna's baby showed a genetic condition that didn't run in Anna's family but did in Emma's. DNA testing revealed the babies had been swapped. Both mothers had bonded with the wrong babies for 2 weeks. The psychological trauma of learning you'd been caring for your niece-nephew instead of your own child, then having to exchange babies you'd bonded with, was devastating for both families. The hospital's mix-up of identical twin mothers created lasting emotional damage. Both families sued and won substantial settlements, but no money could undo the trauma. The babies were safely returned to their biological mothers, but both families required therapy to process the experience. The case highlighted how even in modern hospitals with extensive safety protocols, identical twins can create confusion that leads to catastrophic medical errors with lifelong emotional consequences for everyone involved. The brutal truth about identical twin mix-ups is that our identity verification systems, from visual recognition to database matching, often fail when two people look exactly alike. Most of us assume we can tell people apart reliably, but these cases prove that assumption can lead to marriages to the wrong person, years in prison for crimes we didn't commit, or having someone else's life-saving surgery while our own life-threatening condition goes untreated. The real identity crisis was the systems we trusted along the way. Every wrongful conviction, botched surgery, failed marriage, and destroyed career in this video resulted from people, institutions, or technologies that couldn't reliably distinguish between two individuals who happened to share identical DNA and appearance. History's lesson is clear. When dealing with identical twins, visual recognition isn't enough. Assumptions are dangerous, and verification systems must use multiple identity factors beyond appearance. The people and institutions in this video learned these lessons after destroying lives. Better to learn them beforehand and implement proper verification procedures that account for the possibility of identical twins before catastrophic mix-ups occur. Subscribe if you want to remember that identical twins aren't interchangeable people, that identity verification requires more than recognizing a face, and that the consequences of mixing up two people who look exactly alike can destroy lives in ways that can never be fully repaired.